Good afternoon, average engineers. Today I wanted to talk about an interesting article I wrote recently on Substack. I'll leave a link in the comments, called Why Analytics is a Lose-Lose Game. It's for the birds. Anyone who's worked around data and analytics for any amount of times knows that analytics is an absolute meat grinder. It takes people in and it just churns them out. If they survive, they're just angry and bitter people the rest of their lives. It's a hard job. Much harder than data engineering, much harder than the average software engineering job. Anything around analytics, data analyst, analytics engineer, anything like that, it's a cruel and hard mistress. And just so you know, I started my life out there. That's how I got into IT. Actually, I got into the data warehousing. I used to be the guy writing the SSRS reports on SQL Server. I was into SAP, Tableau, Looker, all that stuff way back in the day. It is a brutal job, and I know firsthand that it's brutal. I guess a question always on my mind was, why is analytics so brutal? Even today I look at it and it still hasn't changed over all these years. Analytics is still a brutal job no matter what company I've been at. It's always the worst. And the question is, why is it like that? Some of the things I think are the reason for this are overwork. I think analytics people are just generally overworked and understaffed. I think it's a high level of stress job just by default. There's always lots of bugs because it's data and analytics, and it's just filled with bugs no matter where you work. There's always tons of demands, high pressure demands, and demands that come out of nowhere all the time, more so than other software jobs. It's never-ending changes and never-ending requests, and that makes it a meat grinder. I think another thing about analytics is that they're very close to the business. Most software engineering jobs, there's a product manager, there's some sort of layer, there's some sort of protection between the business and the software engineers. Typically, this is less so the case in analytics. They are absolutely working with the business every day, and there's a very little filter between analytics and the business. And so they bear the brunt of a lot of problems and a lot of questions and a lot of inquiries come that way because they are so close, and this leads to a lot of stress and burnout. I mean, anyone who works with the business and around data knows that the business always wants answers now. They always have new questions. They always question everything all the time. They always expect perfection, and they really don't understand data that well most of the time. And it's really hard for them to accept the dirtiness of data. And they also don't have many times a very technical background, so that analytics person is kind of that go-between, almost like some technical product person is, between translating technical things and exclamations back to the business. And from a technical aspect, I think there also is some blame to be laid at the feet of analytics departments. Rarely does analytics have the support and the tech they need. Typically, they're kind of thrown in the deep end. They're kind of like quasi-technical, quasi-business, quasi-analytics, and very rarely do they have the support they need and the tooling that they need from engineering. And they live in this world between engineering and between analytics, and they live in this world between engineering and between the business. They have their foot in both worlds, and they rarely have the resources they need to do the things that they need in the time requested and the way requested by the business. Also, one thing I've noticed is that because of this high stress environment and being close to the business, a lot of times analytics as a whole, that department, the people working in there, they're typically bad at planning and details because they are running around like a chicken with their head cut off all the time. They need to work on these things. If they took more of an approach of planning big picture things like engineering does, they probably would maybe reduce some of that stress and probably be able to push back on the business and say, hey, look, we need time to do this sort of stuff. Also, they need more support from engineering. They need to be more technical. Engineering needs to train them. I don't think analytics should always just hand off to engineering, hey, we need this, do this, or engineering should just hand it to them, to analytics, and say, oh, here's your data mart, just go use it. I think there should be more collaboration there because it's going to make analytics people better. It's going to make engineers be able to support analytics better. Also, analytics needs more protection, if you want to call it that, from the daily influx of the business. The business as a whole needs to make sure there is some sort of buffer between analytics, that they can't just crush them at any time they need. Anytime they need something, they can't just Slack them, email them 50 times a day asking them for this and that and this other little thing and expect things to work out for the best in the long run. Also, I've noticed that the analytics addressing tech debt. A lot of times they're moving quickly, just pumping things out during a request, and a lot of tech debt builds up over time. That can become really stressful and cause reports to be wrong, things to be slow, and that just leads to a lot of problems. Analytics needs to run more like an engineering organization when it comes to technical debt. They need to deal with it seriously. They need to think about things from a long-term point of view when they're working on them and be able to address tech debt and take the big picture and do big projects that will help analytics as a whole overall. Also, one thing I think analytics struggle with is taking ownership of data quality. They might say, well, this isn't our data, but honestly, they're the people closest to the data and they know the data best. They really need to take ownership of data quality, data checks, data validation, things like that. They don't take it seriously enough, even though it causes them the most headaches downstream. I can summarize this all by saying that people in analytics, they need to be more methodical and engineering oriented in their approach to taking requests and solving problems at a high level, not so scatterbrained and not so one-off. Also, I think the business needs to be held accountable for just being crazy about requests, the time constraints, the planning, the like when it comes to analytics. They need to have skin in the game. They need to slow down. Again, I think analytics is a meat grinder. It will always be that way, and I'm not sure why, because I think people recognize that, and it's been like that for a long time. But I think applying a more engineering mindset to analytics would fix a lot of problems, as well as making sure there is some sort of filter and a wall between the business analytics that it typically isn't there, that causes a lot of stress and a lot of bad decisions to be made quickly. I typically find that the problem is the culture of chaos that can happen in the business and that they operate in can bleed into that culture of analytics because they're so close. And over time, that really affects the analytics platform as a whole. So the business and analytics, they need to sort of embrace the engineering excellence when it comes to planning and daily operations. Many times the solution is to slow down, to speed up, and have better results over the long term.